When Arthur and Mei Lin Chen bought a 380-square-foot cottage at a municipal auction for $7, the entire district of Willowbrook thought they'd finally lost their grip on reality. The roof sagged like a tired old horse. The plumbing had frozen and burst 3 winters prior. The garden was a concrete slab where someone had once parked a truck. The borough supervisor called it a blight on the historic district. Their daughter in Seattle sent a text that simply read, "Please tell me this is a joke." But Arthur had spent 35 years as a bridge inspector for the state. And Malin carried a secret she told no one in 4 decades. A master's in ecological design from the Rhode Island School of Design, earned at 24. Then folded away like a beautiful handkerchief when she married and moved west. Together, those 2 histories would reshape something the neighborhood couldn't yet imagine, but that was 12 months away. On the Thursday morning it began. The only thing Arthur Chen created was bewilderment. He walked into the municipal building in downtown Willowbrook with $23 in his wallet and sat in the rear of a conference room that smelled of industrial cleaner and the donuts someone had left on a folding table. The tax sale drew perhaps 15 people, house flippers mostly, young men in puffer jackets scanning their phones for comparables in Portland. Nobody noticed the 73-year-old in the worn barn coat. Arthur had spotted the listing in the Willowbrook Weekly 6 days earlier. Parcel 4421, 88 Mulberry Lane, residential, 380 SQFT, opening bid, $1. He'd been eating congee at the kitchen table of the condo he and Malin rented near the river. 2 bedrooms, beige carpet, a balcony view of a parking structure. The kind of place you moved to when the house where you'd raised your daughter felt too full of ghosts. He'd almost turned the page. Then the address stopped him, Mulberry Lane. He read it 3 times, set down his spoon. Didn't mention it to Malin, not yet. He needed to sit with it first. That night he slept poorly. He lay in the dark, remembering an address he hadn't spoken aloud in 38 years. A cottage he and Malin had moved into in 1986, when they were 28 and 26, with a combined savings of $900 and a daughter on the way, though they didn't know it yet. He rose at 5 a.m. and sat in the living room watching the sky lighten over the parking structure. Thursday morning, he told Malin he was driving to the lumber yard for weather stripping. He drove to the municipal building instead. Parcel 4421 came up near the end. The auctioneer recited the description with the enthusiasm of someone reading a bus schedule. 88 Mulberry Lane, residential, 380 square feet, condition as is, liens cleared by the borough, minimum bid $1. Nobody stirred. $1. Anyone? A flipper in the second row whispered to his partner. They smirked. Arthur raised his bidder card. $1 to number 12. Do I hear 2? Silence. Going once. Going twice. 5, Arthur said. He didn't know why. Perhaps buying a home for a single dollar felt like theft. Perhaps he wanted to honor whatever the place had once been. $5 to number 12. Sold. The gavel cracked. A few heads turned, pity and curiosity in equal measure. The flipper who'd smirked leaned to his friend and said, loud enough, "That old guy just bought the teardown of the year." Arthur signed the paperwork, paid cash, and walked out with a deed in his coat pocket. He drove to Mulberry Lane alone first. Needed to see it before Malin did. Needed to know the depth of the damage before her face told him. The cottage sat at the crooked end of the lane, a small salt box behind a yard of cracked concrete and rusted rebar. Cedar shingles had slipped from the roof in patches, exposing the tar paper beneath. The front stoop had settled at an angle that suggested surrender. A vertical crack ran through the chimney breast wide enough to slide a pencil into. The mailbox, still bearing the name GARCIA in faded letters, hung from a single screw. Arthur stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets for a long time. Then he climbed the stoop, pushed the swollen door, and went inside. The smell hit first: mold, ancient plaster, something feral. The main room was perhaps 12 by 13. Buckled linoleum, water-bloated ceiling tiles, a kitchen where the cabinets had delaminated from the humidity. The bathroom door was missing entirely. A closet-sized bedroom in the rear held a window spiderwebbed with cracks. 380 square feet of neglect. Arthur closed his eyes and pressed his palm to the wall. 35 years of bridge inspection. Suspension cables, load-bearing trusses, the hidden stresses that made structures stand or fall. He knew what collapse felt like, and he knew what endurance felt like. The studs behind the crumbling plaster were old-growth fir, dense and true. The floor joists beneath the ruined subfloor were full-dimension lumber, not the modern shaved stuff. The chimney crack was superficial, thermal expansion, not structural failure. Someone had built this cottage with care in 1923. The skeleton was sound. "Every house wants to be something," he said to the empty room. "You just have to listen." He drove home and found Mei-Lin pruning the orchid on their balcony. "How was the lumber yard?" she asked. "I didn't go to the lumber yard." She looked up. "I went to the municipal building, tax sale." He set the deed on the table between them. "I bought a house." Mei-Lin picked up the deed, read the address. Her face went very still. "Mulberry Lane," she said. "Arthur, is this? Come see it." They drove in silence. When he parked at the curb and Mei-Lin saw the cottage, she stood on the sidewalk for a long time without speaking. Then she walked past the building entirely and stopped in the center of the concrete slab. "The hawthorn is still here," she said, looking at the gnarled tree leaning over the neighbor's fence. "It was a sapling when we lived here. I tied a ribbon to it when we moved in. You remember." She crouched and ran her hand across the concrete's edge, where soil had accumulated in the crack between slab and foundation. "Arthur, feel this." He knelt beside her. Where the concrete met the foundation, decades of leaf litter had compressed into humus, dark, fragrant, alive. "Nobody paved the whole yard," Mei-Lin said. "Just this center. The edges have been composting for 40 years. This soil is better than anything I've seen in a decade." She stood and turned slowly, studying the lot. The drainage channel toward the street, the afternoon light angling over the neighbor's roof, the way winter water would flow. "I can work with this," she said quietly. They went inside together. Arthur showed her the walls, the ceiling, the crack in the chimney, explaining what was sound and what needed replacing. Mei-Lin listened, nodded, but her eyes kept drifting to the windows back toward the yard. Then she stopped in the kitchen doorway. Her fingers traced the wood near the hinge. She crouched. "Arthur," 2 characters carved into the jamb, crude and young, Chinese letter. He'd carved them the night they moved in. 1986. She'd been pregnant with Lily, though they wouldn't know for 2 more weeks. "You told me I was defacing the property." "You were defacing the property." Mei-Lin's voice thickened. She pressed her fingers to the characters. "This is our house. Was our house." They stood together in the wreck of the place where they'd begun. The ceiling stained, the floor buckled, the walls stripped to the studs. But those 2 characters remained, cut into the wood 38 years ago by a 28-year-old man who believed he had infinite time. Word moved fast in a borough of 6,000. By Friday morning, everyone in Willowbrook knew that Arthur and Mei-Lin Chen had bought the condemned cottage on Mulberry Lane for $5. The reactions were predictable. At the cafe on Hawthorne, 2 women shook their heads over their matcha lattes. 73 and buying a ruin. Their daughter should intervene. At the post office, a man asked Arthur if he was feeling okay, generally speaking. At the barber shop, the consensus was that Mei-Lin had always been a bit artistic. You know how those types are. Supervisor Diane Harcourt heard about it on Friday afternoon. She'd governed Willowbrook for 8 years, drove a Tesla, and considered the historic district her personal aesthetic responsibility. She drove past 88 Mulberry, looked for perhaps 15 seconds, and called the borough office from her car. "That property is a blight," she said. "Get code enforcement there by Tuesday." That evening, Arthur's phone rang. Lily calling from Seattle. "Dad, what is this I'm hearing about you buying a house for $5? $7, actually. I bid $5, but there were fees. A condemned house. Tax delinquent, different thing." "Dad," Lily used her reasonable voice, the one that made Arthur's jaw tighten. "You're 73. Mom is 71. This isn't the time for a project like this." "When is the time?" "I'm serious. David and I have been talking. We think you and Mom should consider something more manageable. That continuing care community near us, maybe. The views are incredible. Your mother and I are managing. A $5 house with a sagging roof doesn't sound like managing. Sounds like a bargain to me. Good night, Lily." He hung up. Malin stood in the hallway. "How did that go?" "As expected. David next, I assume. He left a voicemail while you were talking. Very concerned." "Very, we just want what's best." Malin played it on speaker. David's voice, measured and kind, and absolutely certain they were making a terrible mistake. Malin set the phone down and went to the bedroom. When Arthur followed, he found her with a storage bin open on the bed. Inside, portfolios with frayed edges, vellum sheets rolled with ribbon, and a diploma in a simple wooden frame. Master of Design, Ecological Design, 1982. "I put this away when I was 26, Malin said. She held the diploma in both hands. 38 years, that's how long a dream can wait." Arthur sat beside her. "You're certain? We could repair it and sell, make a small profit." She looked at him. "Arthur, I have been arranging succulents in ceramic pots for 38 years, and pretending that was sufficient. I sketched bios walls on receipts at restaurants. I redesigned every neglected lot I passed. I have been waiting without knowing I was waiting until I touched that soil. Then we do it. We do it." They moved in on Saturday. 2 camping pads, a butane stove, a cooler, and 6 boxes of tools. Arthur rigged a temporary water line from the outdoor spigot. The electricity functioned on one circuit, 3 outlets, and a single LED bulb screwed into a ceramic fixture. That first night, they lay on the pads in the dark and listened. The settling of old timber, wind through gaps in the sash windows, somewhere a drip from the compromised roof. "People believe we've lost our minds," Malin said. "I know. Good. Means they're watching." Arthur reached across the gap and found her hand. He woke before dawn. Cold in the cottage, but morning light came through the east window and struck the fir floor at an angle that turned the old wood honey gold. Beneath the ruined surface layer, the grain was tight and true. Arthur pulled on his work boots and began prying up the rotted boards. The shriek of old nails filled the small space, and the sound wood beneath emerged into the light, one plank at a time. Outside, Malin sat on the cracked stoop with tea from the camp stove and a sketchbook she'd packed with the cookware. The morning was cool and misty. She could hear Arthur working inside. She opened to a fresh page and began to draw. Measurements first. Sun angles, the slope where rainwater pooled, the microclimate created by the hawthorn's canopy. Then planting zones, drainage swales, elevation changes. A series of rain gardens stepping down from the foundation to the sidewalk, gravel paths threading between them. Native pollinator plants selected for sequential blooming, camassia, yarrow, penstemon, asters, so something would be in flower from March through November. She filled 8 pages before Arthur emerged, sawdust in his hair. "You've been out here 3 hours, he said. She held up the pad. Arthur studied the drawings the way he studied bridge plans, following the contour lines, the drainage arrows, the layering of plant communities. "Malin," he said, "this is professional work." "I know it is." He sat beside her on the stoop. Across the lane, a curtain moved, someone observing. "The neighborhood is watching," Arthur said. Malin turned another page and kept drawing. "Let them watch." Arthur drove to the building supply co-op on Monday morning with a list written on the back of a takeout menu. Hydraulic cement 18 bags, vapor barrier 6 mil, structural lumber full dimension, cedar shingles number 1 grade, hot-dipped galvanized fasteners. A new wrecking bar. His old one had twisted, pulling up the waterlogged subfloor. The co-op was a worker-owned place on the arterial road, cinder block building with lumber racks outside, and a mural of local watersheds painted across the front. The manager worked the counter, a wiry woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. Arthur set his list down. The manager picked it up, scanned it, looked at him over her glasses. "Chen, you're the one who bought the Mulberry place." "That's right. 18 bags of hydraulic cement. Chimney breast has a thermal crack. I need to repoint, install expansion joints and seal." She studied him. "You done masonry work before. 35 years inspecting bridges." "I've seen every failure mode concrete can offer." That shifted the conversation. She set the list down and leaned on the counter. "Crack runs vertical or stepped?" "Stepped. Northeast face." "Superficial, no displacement." She nodded slowly. "All right, I'll pull everything. You want delivery? I've got my truck. Load it out back. I'll give you the member price." Arthur paused. "I'm not a member." "You are now. Name's Gloria." They shook hands. He loaded the truck himself. Gloria watched from the loading dock but didn't offer help, which Arthur appreciated. His knee complained on the heavy lifts, but his hands were steady and his back was straight. Decades of climbing bridge scaffolding had kept more muscle on him than most men his age. The chimney work began that afternoon. Arthur mixed the cement in a wheelbarrow in the yard, then troweled it into the stepped crack in thin lifts, tooling each layer before adding the next. He'd done this on piers and abutments across 3 states. The technique was the same whether the structure was a suspension tower or a cottage chimney. Malin worked beside him. She held the mixing tub, passed tools, swept debris. When he finished the exterior repointing, she helped him move inside to seal the interior face with lime plaster. "How long before we can paint?" she asked. 4 weeks for full cure, but it'll shed water in 72 hours. "Good. I need that corner stable before I plant the espaliered pear." By the end of the first week, the chimney was sealed, and Arthur had begun reinforcing the subfloor. He pulled every rotted board, treated the joists with borate, and laid new plywood where the damage was too extensive. The original fir, the sound stuff, he sanded and saved. More than half the floor was salvageable. News of their progress didn't soften the neighborhood's opinion. If anything, it calcified it. People drove past slowly, craning their necks. A teenager posted a photo with the caption, "Willowbrook's $7 Palace." The comments on the neighborhood forum turned cruel. Someone should call Adult Protective Services. That property should have been demolished. Malin saw the post. Arthur found her in the kitchen staring at her phone. "Ignore it," he said. 43 comments. Everyone believes we're senile. 43 people who have never repaired anything in their lives. She put the phone in a drawer and didn't retrieve it for 4 days. On Monday of the second week, a white truck with the borough seal pulled up. A young man emerged carrying a tablet. Code enforcement. Arthur met him at the curb. "Mr. Chen, building department. We received a complaint about unpermitted work." "What kind of work?" "Structural modifications, roofing, electrical." Arthur reached into his back pocket and produced a folded envelope. Inside, 5 permits, each with the borough seal and the inspector's signature. Chimney repair, roof replacement, electrical service upgrade, plumbing, structural. "I pulled these the morning after purchase," Arthur said, "before I drove a single nail." The officer scrolled through the permits on his tablet, checked the dates, the signatures. His expression shifted from official to embarrassed. "These are in order. I know they are. I've been filing bridge inspection reports for 35 years. Who filed the complaint?" The officer hesitated. "I can't disclose. You don't need to." "I know who it was." Arthur folded the permits back into his pocket. "Tell Supervisor Harcourt the work meets code, every measurement." The officer left. Arthur went back inside and kept working. While Arthur rebuilt the cottage from the inside out, Maylin worked the outside. She spent the first 2 weeks measuring, testing soil biology, mapping sun exposure at different hours, sketching revised plans on the kitchen table each night by the light of a clip-on lamp. The overhead fixture still needed rewiring. The first deliveries arrived in the 3rd week. Pallets of basalt from a quarry in the Columbia Gorge, cubic yards of compost and biochar, crushed stone for drainage. She'd found a native plant nursery 70 miles north that specialized in Willamette Valley ecoregion species, and they shipped her 6 flats of plugs packed in moist coconut coir. Arthur came out one morning to find the yard staked with bamboo poles and surveyor's tape. "Looks like a job site," he said. "It is a job site." She began with the rain gardens. The lot had a natural slope, perhaps 16 inches of fall from the foundation to the sidewalk. Most would have leveled it and poured more concrete. Maylin designed 3-stepped bioswales into the slope, held by dry-stacked basalt walls. Each swale was a different depth and aspect, which meant each would host different plant communities with different moisture and light needs. She moved every stone herself. Arthur offered to help. She told him to finish the roof. Margaret had been watching for weeks. She lived 3 houses up, a retired nurse in her 70s who spent mornings on her covered porch with tea and a view of the lane. She'd watched Arthur carry lumber. She'd watched the code enforcement truck come and go. She'd watched Maylin haul basalt across the yard, one piece at a time, stacking it into walls that followed curves only Maylin seemed to perceive. On a Thursday morning in early April, Margaret came down. Maylin was on her knees in the soil, setting a stone into the first terrace wall. She looked up and saw the older woman standing at the edge of the concrete, arms crossed. "You need help?" Margaret asked. "I'm managing." "I didn't ask if you were managing. I asked if you needed help." Maylin sat back on her heels and wiped her forehead with her wrist. "Do you know anything about dry stone construction?" "I know how to carry things and follow directions." Maylin smiled. "Then yes. I could use help." Margaret entered the yard and crouched beside her. They worked together for an hour, fitting stones, adjusting angles, packing crushed rock behind each course for drainage. Margaret was quiet and capable, and she didn't ask questions until they stopped for water. "Where did you learn this?" Margaret asked, sitting on an overturned bucket. "School. What school teaches you to build stone walls?" "The kind where you get a master's in ecological design." Margaret stared at her. "You have a master's in ecological design. Earned it when I was 24. Then I married and put it away." "For how long?" 38 years. Margaret was quiet. 38 years. I designed landscapes in my head every day for 38 years. Every vacant lot, every neglected park, every street tree poorly placed. I redesigned them all. I simply never had ground to work. Margaret looked at the staked yard, the bamboo poles, the terrace walls taking shape. "Well, you've got ground now." Maylin picked up the next stone and set it into place. "It's going to be the best thing this watershed has seen in decades." Margaret returned the next morning and the morning after. She began bringing thermoses of oolong and rice crackers wrapped in cloth, and the 2 women worked side by side through April and into May while Arthur hammered and sawed inside. The roof came next. Arthur needed to strip the old shingles, repair the skip sheathing underneath, and lay new cedar. He rented a debris box and set up scaffolding along the south face. On the first morning, Arthur climbed the ladder at 6:30. He moved deliberately, favoring his left knee, but once on the roof his footing was sure. He'd walked steel beams 200 feet above river gorges. A single-story cottage roof was solid ground. By 9:00, he'd stripped half the south face and found the sheathing underneath in better condition than expected. Only 3 boards needed replacement. A neighbor across the lane had been watching from his kitchen window. At 9:15, he called the fire department. The engine came with lights but no siren. 2 firefighters looked up at the roof. Arthur looked down at them. "Morning. Sir, we received a call about an elderly individual in distress on a roof. Do I appear distressed?" The younger firefighter squinted up. Arthur was crouched on the skip sheathing with a pry bar in one hand, a leather nail pouch at his hip, balanced on his boots, perfectly at ease. "No, sir. You look like you've done this before." "I have. Proceed with your day. I'll be up here several more hours." They left. The neighbor who'd called stood in his driveway looking sheepish. Arthur waved and returned to work. That evening, Maylin told Margaret about the fire department visit over tea. Margaret laughed until she wheezed. "This neighborhood," she said. Someone could be growing tomatoes, and they'd call emergency services to verify the vines aren't a strangulation hazard. "They mean well," Maylin said. "Some mean well. The rest are simply incurious." Maylin couldn't dispute that. The weeks accumulated. Arthur finished the roof and moved to the interior walls. He stripped the old plaster, insulated the stud bays with wool bats, and hung new drywall. In 380 square feet, every inch mattered. He designed built-in shelving using the space between studs, a drop-leaf table hinged to the kitchen wall that served as both work surface and dining surface, storage benches along the main room wall, a closet system in the bedroom that tripled the usable space. Maylin would come inside at day's end, covered in soil, and walk through the rooms. "You're making it larger without adding square footage," she said. "That's the intention." "How?" "By using every inch instead of wasting them on circulation and dead corners. This cottage was built in 1923. Then 380 square feet was sufficient for a couple. It remains sufficient. One must simply be deliberate." At night, they sat on the stoop, sore and tired, and watched the lane darken. Margaret's porch light glowed 3 houses up. A dog barked somewhere. Traffic passed on the arterial road. "Lily hasn't called in 2 weeks, Maylin said one evening. "I noticed. David either. Give them time. They believe we're declining. They believe this is some episode. They'll see what we build, then they'll understand. And if they don't," Arthur was quiet, "then we build it anyway." What he didn't know was that Lily and David had been talking, not to their parents, but to each other. Weekly video calls that grew longer and more anxious. Lily had researched signs of cognitive decline in older adults and compiled a checklist. David had consulted an attorney about guardianship. On a Saturday morning in early May, Lily flew to Portland. David picked her up at the airport. They drove 90 minutes to Willowbrook without notifying Arthur or Maylin. They parked on Mulberry Lane at 1:00 p.m. Arthur was on a ladder, installing a new sash window in the bedroom. Maylin was in the yard on her knees in the second terrace, planting a row of camassia plugs. Margaret was beside her, tamping soil around each plant. Lily and David emerged from the car and stood on the sidewalk. The cottage still appeared rough. The new roof was on, but the exterior hadn't been painted. The yard was excavated, half-built walls and bare soil and bamboo poles everywhere. Lily looked at her mother, 71 years old, kneeling in mud with soil under her fingernails. She looked at her father on a ladder with a cordless driver in one hand and a cedar shim in the other. She looked at David. "This is worse than I imagined," she said. Maylin heard the car doors and looked up. Her expression tightened. "Arthur," she called. He looked down from the ladder, saw his children on the sidewalk with matching faces of concern. He set down the driver and climbed down slowly, his knee stiff. "Lily, David." A phone call would have been courteous. "We wanted to see for ourselves," David said. He looked at the house, the torn-up yard, at his parents, both filthy and exhausted, standing before a property that still looked like disaster to anyone who couldn't read the work. "Mom, Dad, we need to discuss your living situation." Arthur wiped his hands on his work pants and met his son-in-law's eyes. "Then you'd better come inside." The interior stopped Lily in the doorway. The drywall was up but unpainted. The floors were half-finished, patches of restored fur beside sheets of bare plywood. A drop-leaf table hung from the kitchen wall. Built-in shelves lined the main room, each one level and true. The ceiling was clean, no stains, new insulation above it. The kitchen had a functioning sink, a small range, a refrigerator humming in the corner. Lily had expected squalor. This was a renovation. David came in behind her. He ran his hand along the built-in shelving. "Your father," Malin said. "All of it, all of it." Margaret had quietly excused herself when the children arrived. The four of them stood in the main room, which felt smaller with all of them inside. David cleared his throat. "It looks better than I expected. I'll acknowledge that. But this doesn't change the fundamental situation. You're 73 and 71, living in 380 square feet with no central heat, doing manual labor 12 hours daily, some days 14. Arthur said, "That's precisely my point." "And my point is that I've never felt more vital," Lily interjected. "Dad, we're not questioning your capability, we're questioning your judgment. You invested your retirement savings in a condemned property. You're inhabiting it. The yard resembles a construction zone." "The yard is a construction zone," Malin said quietly. "Because it is one." "Mom," Lily's voice softened, "we love you, both of you. We simply believe this may be too much. David and I have discussed options." "What kind of options?" Arthur asked. Lily and David exchanged a glance. "There's an excellent life plan community near us," Lily said. "Independent living with support available. We could sell this property. Likely recover your $7 and apply the proceeds from your lease to the entry fee." The room went quiet. Arthur's jaw worked, but he didn't speak. Malin did. "Lily, David, sit down." They sat on the storage bench. Malin went to the bedroom and returned with the storage bin. She set it on the drop-leaf table and opened it. "This is my diploma," she said, holding up the framed certificate. "Master of Design, Ecological Design, 1982. She set it on the table. "These are my design texts." She pulled out 2 substantial books with frayed spines and marginal notes in 3 colors. "And these are my original studio work." She unrolled a sheaf of vellum and spread it across the table. Lily and David stared. "I earned this degree at 24, Malin said. "I set it aside when I married your father because that was what women did in 1986. I spent 38 years designing landscapes in my head without ever setting a spade in the ground. Every vacant lot I passed, every neglected park, every street tree in every city we lived in, I redesigned them all and never spoke of it to anyone." She pointed out the window at the excavated yard. "That is the first built project I have ever completed. I designed it. I engineered the hydrology. I selected every plant based on soil biology, aspect, and phenology. It is professional work, and you want me to abandon it for a garden courtyard at a life plan community." David opened his mouth, closed it. "Your father," Malin continued, "spent 35 years inspecting bridges. He evaluated load paths for structures that still carry traffic in 4 states. The work he's doing on this cottage is the same work he did his entire career. He is not confused. He is not declining. He is building." She looked at both of them, her eyes steady. "Your father and I aren't losing our faculties. We're finally using them." The silence extended. Arthur stood by the window, arms crossed, watching his children process what their mother had said. Lily picked up one of Maylin's old drawings, a wetland park design, graded paths through native meadow, benches positioned for viewsheds. It was beautiful work, precise, alive, ecological. "Mom," Lily said, "I didn't know. You never asked." That struck hard. Lily set the drawing down. "You raised us," David said. "You both gave us everything." "We gave you what we had," Maylin said. "And we loved doing so. But we also possessed our own capacities, aspirations that were deferred, skills that remained in boxes. One doesn't cease to be oneself because one became parents." Arthur set down his mug. "Some people retire and sit down. Your mother and I simply finally stood up." Lily looked at the magazine cover. There was none yet, but she imagined one pinned to the wall in her mind. Her mother, 71, on her knees in a garden she designed from nothing. Her father standing in a doorway with characters carved into the jamb 38 years ago. "I'm sorry," Lily said. "For the life plan community discussion, for the guardianship research, I'm sorry." "Me too," David said. Maylin reached across the table and took Lily's hand, then David's. "You were concerned. Parents who love their children understand that. We were never angry. We were hurt that you couldn't see us clearly. But you're here now. That matters." Arthur opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the 1986 deed, set it on the table beside the tax sale receipt. $47,000 the first time, he said. $7 the second time. He tapped the older document. Same house, same people. Lily picked up the old deed and studied it. The signatures at the bottom, young, certain, her parents' names in ink that had faded to sepia. "May I see the garden?" she asked, really asked this time. Not from the sidewalk. Maylin stood. "Come." They walked through the garden together, all four of them. For the first time, Maylin explained everything. The hydrological engineering, the successional planting, the species selection, how the rain gardens captured runoff that used to flood the basement of the house downhill, how the gravel paths directed water at a 2% grade into the planting beds before it ever reached the storm drain. Lily listened with her urban planner brain switched off and her daughter brain switched on. "This is professional work," Lily said. "You sound like your father," Maylin replied. David crouched beside the lowest terrace and touched the basalt wall. Each stone fitted tight against the next. No mortar, held by gravity and precision. "You laid all this yourself." Margaret helped, "but I designed it and placed every stone." David shook his head. "I didn't know you could do this." "Neither did I," Maylin said. "Not with certainty. I had designed it 1,000 times in my mind, but I had never set stone on stone until March. One doesn't know what one can do until one finally attempts." They stayed until dark. Ate dinner at the drop-leaf table, all four of them compressed into space built for two. Lily's knees pressed the wall. David sat on the storage bench. It was cramped and uncomfortable, and it was the first meal they'd shared in 18 months. When Lily and David left, the embraces at the door were different from those in May. Longer, softer. Lily held her father and didn't release for a long moment. "I'm proud of you, Dad." Arthur patted his daughter's back. "It took you some time." It did. After the car departed, Arthur and Maylin sat on the stoop in two folding chairs. The garden was dark around them, but the scent of cold soil and emerging growth drifted up from the beds. Margaret's porch light glowed 3 houses up. "They saw us," Maylin said. "They did, took 3 visits. Some people require multiple demonstrations." Maylin leaned back. The evening was cool, the first true suggestion of autumn, crickets in the garden. A car on the arterial road, the small solid cottage behind them. "Arthur, yes, I'm glad you lied about the weather stripping." He reached over and took her hand. And they sat together on the stoop of the $7 house and listened to the night settle over Mulberry Lane. 3 months later, Mulberry Lane looked different. Margaret's house had fresh sage-green paint and window boxes with winter kale and violas. The man across the lane had replaced his failing retaining wall with a dry-stacked stone terrace and planted native ferns along it. 2 houses down from Margaret, a young couple had torn out their asphalt driveway and installed permeable pavers with a bioswale down the center. They'd asked Maylin for advice on the grading. She'd sketched them a section on the back of a grocery bag. The house downhill, the one that used to flood every winter, had a new gutter system and a rain garden in the side yard. The homeowner said he'd gotten the idea from watching Maylin's work. He'd researched rain gardens, ordered plants from the same nursery, and built it over 3 weekends. 9 houses on the lane had been improved since spring. Nobody organized it. Nobody held a meeting. People simply began caring for their properties, one house at a time. The way a fracture in ice propagates outward from the point of first pressure. Arthur noticed it on his morning walks. He'd begun circling the block each day, partly for his knee, partly because he enjoyed observing the changes. Fresh paint here, a repaired porch there, a mailbox straightened. A hedge released from shearing into natural form, a dead elm finally removed. "The lane is waking up," he told Maylin one morning over tea. "Lanes don't wake up," she said. "People do." The workshops began in October. They weren't planned. A man at the co-op had asked Arthur about masonry repair, and Arthur had spent 20 minutes sketching details on scrap paper. The following week, 3 more people asked. By the 3rd week, Maylin suggested they simply choose a Saturday and open the yard. They posted a handwritten sign on the mailbox, "Free workshop, home repair and ecological design." Saturday 10:00, 17 people came. Arthur set up a folding table on the stoop and laid out his tools. Maylin spread her sketches on the gravel path and walked people through site analysis, soil assessment, plant selection. Arthur taught the group how to read a foundation, where to look for cracks, how to distinguish thermal expansion from structural settlement, when to be concerned, when to repair. He brought samples of hydraulic cement, lime mortar, and sealant, and demonstrated proper repointing technique. "You don't repair masonry by concealing it," he said. "You excavate to where the damage begins, then you work from the bottom." A woman from the next town raised her hand. "My contractor says you just parge over it and paint. Your contractor is creating future failure." Everyone laughed. Arthur smiled, which was rare enough that Maylin noticed. Maylin's portion of the workshop drew the larger crowd. She spoke about rain gardens, native plant communities, the distinction between landscaping and ecological design. "Landscaping is decoration," she said. "Ecological design is function. Every plant, every stone, every degree of slope serves a purpose. Beauty emerges from correct function." Margaret brought tea and almond cookies. She set up a table by the garden and served while people walked the property and photographed details. The 2nd Saturday drew 26 people. The 3rd drew 35, more than the yard could comfortably hold. Arthur built benches from scrap lumber and arranged them along the path. By November, the workshops were established. People came from across the county. A high school environmental science teacher brought her students. A woman from the community college asked if Maylin would speak to her restoration ecology class. "I'm not a teacher," Maylin said. "You've been teaching every Saturday for 2 months, Maylin considered. "I'll do it if I can bring my drawings." "Bring whatever you wish." Lily began coming on weekends. Not every weekend, but most. She'd fly from Seattle on Friday evening and sleep on a camping pad in the main room, the same pad her parents had used their first week in the cottage. The first Saturday, she attended a workshop. She stood at the back of the yard and watched her father explain load-bearing walls to strangers. Arthur spoke clearly, patiently, sketching diagrams on a whiteboard propped against the porch railing. He answered every question without condescension. He treated each person's building problem as though it mattered. Lily stood there thinking about all the years her father had driven to field offices, sat at inspection stations, done this same work for agencies and contractors. Now he was doing it for himself, for free, in a yard the neighborhood had mocked 10 months before. After the workshop, Lily approached Arthur. "Dad, let me build you a greenhouse." Arthur looked at her. "What? Behind the cottage, there's space along the back fence. I'll come down weekends. We can do it together. You don't know how to build a greenhouse. Then teach me." They began the following weekend. Lily bought the lumber and polycarbonate panels. Arthur drew plans on the drop-leaf table, and they framed the structure together over 4 Saturdays. Lily was clumsy with a hammer, slow with measurements, had to be reminded twice to check square before securing joints. But she learned. On the 5th Saturday, they hung the door. Lily stepped back and looked at the small structure, 8 by 14, tight and square, glazed panels gathering the afternoon light. "I built that," Lily said. "You assisted in building it," Arthur corrected. "I assisted in building it," Lily grinned. "That's still something." David came less frequently, but his visits had changed. He'd stopped assessing the house as real estate and started seeing it as where his wife's parents lived. He brought pastries from a bakery in Portland. He sat in the garden with Maylin and asked questions about plants, hydrology, soil biology, questions he'd never thought to ask in the 20 years he'd known her. One afternoon, David was walking the garden with a colleague who'd come along for the drive. The colleague was considering a second home in a small town, something with character. "This is what value looks like," David said, pointing at the terrace walls. "Not square footage, not bathroom count. It's what someone invested. The thought, the skill, the attention." The colleague nodded. "You sound different from other brokers I've met." "I'm learning." On a Saturday in late November, Diane Harcourt pulled up in front of the cottage during a workshop. The yard went quiet. 30 people turned to look at the supervisor's Tesla, at the door opening, at the woman stepping out in her wool coat and silk scarf. Diane walked through the gate and up the gravel path. People stepped aside. Arthur was at the whiteboard, midway through a diagram of proper flashing installation. Diane stopped in front of him. The two looked at each other. The yard held its breath. "Arthur, Diane, I've got a drainage problem north side of my house. Water pools against the foundation every rain. I've tried French drains twice. They keep failing." Arthur set down the marker. "What soil type?" "Clay, heavy clay." "French drains don't function in heavy clay without proper filter fabric and daylight outlet. You're simply excavating holes and filling them with gravel." "That's what I suspected, but I don't know how to do it correctly." Arthur looked at her for a long moment. Everyone in the yard was watching. This was the woman who had called their house a blight, sent code enforcement, attempted to shut them down. "Come by Tuesday," Arthur said. "I'll look, I'd appreciate that." Diane nodded to Maylin, turned and walked back to her car. The yard exhaled. Margaret appeared at Arthur's elbow. "You're going to help her. She has a drainage problem. After everything she did." "Margaret," Arthur set down his chalk. "The woman asked for help. That's all that matters." Arthur went to Diane's house on Tuesday. The drainage problem was precisely as described. Arthur designed a proper solution on the spot. A curtain drain with geotextile, gravel bed, and perforated pipe running to daylight at the rear of the lot. He sketched the plan on graph paper and handed it to Diane. "I can't charge you," Arthur said. "I'm not licensed in Oregon. What do I owe you?" "Nothing. Simply stop calling people's homes blights." Diane's mouth twitched, perhaps a smile. "Fair." Through December, Maylin worked on something in the garden that she didn't show Arthur. She'd ordered stone from the same quarry, a different type this time, rounded river cobble in warm grays and tans. She worked on it in the mornings while Arthur was at the co-op or inside building storm windows. Margaret helped her carry the stones, but Mei Lin placed each one herself. She worked from a sketch she hadn't shared, a design she'd drawn at the kitchen table late one night while Arthur slept. On a Wednesday morning in mid-December, she finished. Arthur came out the front door with his tea and stopped on the stoop. In the center of the garden, where the three terrace walls converged, Mei Lin had built a small stone circle, perhaps 7 feet across. The cobble was dry-stacked in a low wall knee-height, just enough to define the space. Inside the circle, she'd set a wooden bench, simple and solid, built from the same reclaimed fir Arthur had salvaged from the original floor. Around the bench, filling the circle and spilling through gaps in the stone, grew yarrow. "They're dormant now," Mei Lin said, appearing beside him. "Brown stems and seed heads. Waiting for spring." But Arthur recognized them. "Those were here when we moved in," he said. "1986, growing wild along the fence. I saved seed from the plants that came up this summer. They're descendants of the same stock, same genetics. They'll bloom gold in June, just as they did 38 years ago." Arthur set his tea on the porch railing and walked down the steps. He stood at the edge of the stone circle and looked at the bench. "You built this for us," he said. "I built this for us." He stepped over the low wall and sat down. The bench held him firmly, solid fur on solid ground. Mei Lin sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. The garden was quiet around them. December had stripped the perennials to their roots, but the structure remained. The terrace walls, the gravel paths, the rain garden filled with dormant rushes, the bones of the design waiting for spring. "Best thing I ever built," Arthur said. "Wasn't a bridge." Mei Lin leaned against him. "It's right here." They sat on the bench in the stone circle in the garden they'd made together. The cottage stood behind them, 380 square feet of fir and drywall and careful engineering. A red door and a carved door jamb and 38 years of love pressed into every joint. Down the lane, Margaret's porch light was on. The man across the way had strung holiday lights along his new stone terrace. The house downhill had a wreath on the door and a rain garden keeping its basement dry for the first winter in a decade. Mulberry Lane was not a famous lane. It would never appear in a guidebook or on a postcard, but it was alive. People waved now. They stopped on the sidewalk to talk. They noticed when someone's gutters needed clearing, when the widow's walk needed sanding, when a tree wanted pruning. They paid attention. 1 year ago, the yard had been concrete. The roof had sagged, the chimney had cracked, and the supervisor had called it a blight, and 2 children had told their parents they'd lost their minds. Now the cottage stood solid on sealed foundations, under a new roof behind a garden that an ecological designer had waited 38 years to build. The children came home on weekends. The neighbors tended their homes. The supervisor asked for help with her drainage. And Arthur and Mei Lin Chen sat on a bench surrounded by dormant yarrow, holding hands in the cold December air, in the house where they'd started and the house where they'd remain. Some things take 38 years to bloom, but when they do, the whole lane knows.